Hi, I'm Colleen Van Lent, and I'm happy to welcome you to Introduction to HTML5. I'm very excited to teach this course because I love the idea that we finally will have some course that will really explain the basics to as many people as possible. I love working with people and I love working with technology, and I think the best thing we can do is have as many people involved as possible to really make sure that we're building things that everyone can use. So in this course, we will be covering the basics. I really can't emphasize enough that we will be starting at the very basic building blocks. So we'll start off talking about what's called syntax and semantics. What are the actual code that people write in order to make a web page a web page? And are there any special meanings behind any of these words that can convey special information to those who may not be able to access the web the same way I do? So perhaps someone who uses special accessibility tools. After we cover the syntax and semantics, we're going to talk more about this accessibility idea that I just alluded to. This idea that if we're going to build a web page, what do we need to do to make sure the most people as possible can access the information? We're also going to be talking about getting started in technology and writing code. And when I mean talking about getting started, I mean really talking about getting started. Right down to you and I are going to walk through together on how we're going to create a file. One of the things I think that really trips people up when they're starting to learn computer science or any type of technology-based criteria or curriculum is that professors or instructors say, let's get started, here's your homework, go ahead and do it, and everyone just kind of stops because they're not sure where to get started. I really want to be there for you to show you how to get started and get off on the right foot. So let's talk about what we'll cover in this course. In week 1, the focus is on questions. It's not on coding, it's on questions. So I want you to understand what happens when you type something into the URL. If you type in www.introwebdesign.com, how is this page magically appearing in front of your browser? I also want to talk to you about what types of tools you are going to need in order to code. So we're going to talk about editors and browsers and other different software tools, because I want you to know right from the start what you're going to need in order to succeed in this class. Finally, we're really going to talk about HTML5. What happened to HTML1? What happened to HTML2? What is this evolution of what's going on with web design and the languages we used? So in week 1, again, almost no coding, really just giving you an idea of how the web works and why it's important for you to be able to interact with people and with code that's being used to create your sites. Week 2, we're going to talk a little bit of theory and then, unfortunately for some people, a lot of code. So there's this idea of something called the document object model upon which all web pages are built. If I can get you to understand just a little bit about that, then later on, if you decide to go off and use WordPress or some other software to make your own website, you're going to be able to really understand what's going on so much better. We're going to talk about things called contextual tags and headings and different things we can use to make our site have different meanings and different appearances. We're going to talk about links, images, lists, tables, and also multimedia in case you would like to add any video or audio to your site. Week 3, we're really going to put it all together. At this point, you should know just enough about HTML5 where you'll be dangerous, where you can create something that works but doesn't work all the time. So in week 3, we're going to put it together, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that are often overlooked, such as validating your code. How can we make sure that the code that you wrote doesn't just look good, it's syntactically correct. It's going to work everywhere. So again, when we validate your code, we'll talk about the syntax, but we'll also talk about accessibility, which is, hey, we validated your code to make sure the rules are there, but let's also validate and make sure that the meaning is there as well. Finally, we'll talk about what's called domain name registration and web hosting, because it's a lot more fun to make websites if you can actually put it out there on the internet and let your friends and family see it as well. Finally, we'll work on a final project where you will put together a lot of different things that you've been learning. You are going to create what we call a syntactically valid multi-page website. So your site will have at least 2 to 3 pages. After you've done your coding, you'll run it through to make sure it validates and it's very accessible. So your final project is actually going to be something that's a little bit ugly, I'm going to admit to right now, because we're not going to be talking about styling, we're not talking about different things. I really just want you to understand the HTML5 language, and that's all about content. So let's talk logistics. Let's talk about who this class is for. Who am I aiming for my kind of star student? I'm really looking forward to teaching the complete beginner, all right? This class is not for those people who were building a computer down in their basement when they were 12 years old. I mean, you're very welcome to hang out with us, but we are really here to talk about how we, through persistence, can create a website. One of the things that I'm kind of anti about is the word passion. Now, I'm passionate about teaching you this material, but I don't really feel like you need to be passionate about technology or passionate about computing to really get a lot out of this class. Instead, it's about persistence. I'd like you to just hang in there and learn enough that you can go off and really help people build better technology. So a little bit about who I am. I have a PhD in computer science, which is really the least important part of my qualifications to teach this class. Instead, I have 2 decades of teaching experience, and I have taught a wide range of different students. My emphasis has always been on education. And I'm somewhat famous for running around the classroom, helping people debug their code, finding out what's going on here, finding out what's going on there. So this whole idea of teaching this class is kind of novel to me because I'm sitting here, not moving. So the important part is that I really do care about people succeeding, and so I'm hoping that I can help you take your skills to the next level. Here's what everyone wants to know. In this class, what kind of workload will there be and how will you be evaluated? There are going to be weekly videos. Some of them are like this, a lecture format. You should really feel free to watch them anywhere. But I'd also like to include some videos that are going to be much more demo format. And by that, I mean you really want to watch the video with the computer next to you so you can type along and test it out and try it. There will be weekly readings. Most of them will be from a free online textbook, but there may be some other online articles I include as well if I happen to come across something that's very timely for what we've been learning. There will be weekly assessments, typically in the form of quizzes, and there will be that final project. And I put in here warning it will be ugly. I don't mean that the process will be ugly. I think you'll find it very straightforward. It's just, again, I can't emphasize enough that this class is about the language HTML5. It's not about creating beautiful sites. It's about you really learning just the building blocks. And it's always so much easier to build something ugly the first time than build something beautiful. So how will you succeed in this class? In a perfect world, you would be coding with 2 or 3 other people and you'd be talking and you'd never be coding alone. So I'm hoping that you'll create a community, probably through the message boards. I need you to work smart. One of the things that kills me is when people say, oh, I spent 3 or 4 hours working on this. I never want to hear that from a student. Instead, I feel that if you've ever run into a problem when you're coding, you should stop after 10, 15, 20 minutes max and go walk away. Go get help from someone, take a break, think about something else. It's all about working smart, not necessarily hard. Next, you really need to learn how to look things up on your own. There is no way I can teach you everything you need to know about HTML5, and you wouldn't want me to. It'd be very boring. Instead, you need to feel the confidence to go out and use search engines to look up the topics that you're interested in. My job is to give you those keywords and key ideas so you know what it is you want to search for. Finally, you really need to practice, practice, practice. You will not succeed in this course unless you've written the code yourself and really tried to muster your way through some of the mistakes and typos that you're going to have. So let's just review. Once again, this class is for beginners, and I'm excited to have you join us. When you're done with this class, you will have the ability to write and understand HTML5 code. So you're not leaving as a developer, but you are going to leave as someone who understands code. And finally, one of the key things that I'm going to stress throughout this whole course is that you will understand the importance of accessibility in technology. If when this course was done, I had even one student who said, hey, you know what? I'm going to go on and I might not be a coder, but I am going to go work with somebody else to help make their code more accessible, I would be thrilled with that. So welcome to the course, and I hope you have a lot of fun as you learn more about HTML5. Hi, today we're going to be talking about HTML5, specifically what it is and why we aren't learning HTML1 instead. So what is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Markup languages are actually very common. They're not the same as programming languages. Instead, they're special languages that use tags to annotate or mark up documents. In HTML, the tags tell the browsers where you want to put headings, images, lists, links, etc. A .html file is a special kind of file. You've already seen special file extensions before. Whenever you open a file that has .doc, your computer knows to open it in Microsoft Word. If you see a file with .ppt, your computer knows, oh, that's a PowerPoint file. I should open it in PowerPoint. In the same way, when your computer sees a .html file, it knows that it should open it in an internet browser such as Chrome, Firefox, or Safari. Your browser can read this file and it knows how to display it on the screen. It's more than that. HTML file tags also allow screen readers and other assistive devices to utilize the tags to present the information in new and special ways. So HTML is very similar to English. You can understand it even if you don't know much about it. Let's look at this example HTML file over here. Most of it is just typical English language. This is an important heading, or hi there, I'm going to include a link to the course page. But if you look closely, you can see we've added these little tiny tags that the browser uses to know how to represent the material. So H1 is just a heading tag. It says to the browser, hey, this is something really important. I want you to put it in bigger font. And also, if someone's using an assistive device, I want them to know this is something important. H2 is also displays some sort of importance, but not as much. I have a P tag for paragraph, and I have another tag down here called an anchor tag to let the browser know, I don't want you to just show this material, I want you to actually link it to a different web page. So here's the output when any browser would look at our code. In the beginning, learning HTML is mostly about learning all those different tags that I showed you in that file. This is called learning the syntax. It's how you learn which brackets to use, backslashes, and different things like that. You spend most of your time going, oh, did I remember that tag and did I write it the right way? That's very short-lived. In just a little amount of time, you're going to gain the confidence to not worry about your syntax and instead to be thinking about the semantics or the meaning behind the tags. How important is this information that I'm trying to get across, and is this the right tag to be using? If someone's searching my page, can they find what they're looking for even if they can't see the text? Can they use the tags to navigate through it? So what happened to HTML1? Why are we using something called HTML5? Well, let's talk about the early years. HTML was created in 1990 as a way to electronically connect different documents via hyperlinks, hence this idea of a web of connections. What was happening is that scientists were using the internet to list their different research papers, and you would have a long list, each paper independent of the other. But HTML gave you ways that you could read a paper and right within the text link to another exciting physics paper. Because the audience for HTML tended to be people like my dad up there in the corner, they were nuclear physicists. They didn't care about things such as color, images, or anything that wasn't science related. And that was the key. HTML was intended to work across any platform. And in order to do this, you really had to avoid things such as special fonts or different colors, or anything that really was more about layout than content. However, in 1993, Mosaic emerged as the first graphical browser. And what that means is that it was the first browser to actually introduce the idea of images. And when that happened, there was a lot of debate among the research community as to whether or not this was a good thing. The pioneers really wanted to keep it simple, content-based, let everyone access it. But the innovators were saying no. People like pictures, they like layout, they like that even as much as they like the content. So there was a big battle between how the internet should evolve from that point. So after Mosaic emerged, the use of the internet just absolutely exploded, and more people were using it for commercial means instead of just for doing research. Mosaic had challengers though, in the form of Netscape, Internet Explorer, and other browsers. This was the start of what we call the browser wars. Each of these browsers decided that they wanted to create these proprietary tags that would only work on their browser. Some of the examples were Marquee, where you could have scrolling text, or Blink, which would only work on some of the browsers and not others. Other tags weren't proprietary, they actually worked on any browser, but they went against the original spirit of HTML. They were tags such as font, or center for centering your text, or background color. This may not sound like a bad thing, but some computers didn't have the access, didn't have the ability to have all the different colors that other computers might have. And this led to some really ugly looking pages. It also led to the origination of what we call the best viewed on messages. When you went to a site, you were almost immediately told which browser you should really view the site on, otherwise you weren't going to get the optimal experience. We in a way suffer from browser wars or best viewed on images today. Many times when you go to a page, you'll see that you can't actually access the full content if you're on your phone unless you click on a link to the full website. So how did this happen? How did we get to the point where different browsers weren't agreeing on the different roles that HTML should play? This comes back to the idea that no one runs the internet or the web. However, some groups have taken a more proactive role to try to help standardize what's going on out there. The first is the Internet Engineering Task Force. They really focus on the idea of how the different networks should collaborate and how they should work together. The World Wide Web Consortium instead deals with HTML and the evolution of HTML. They want to know what kind of tags the browsers should and should not support. Finally, one of the newest groups is the Web Accessibility Initiative. They want to make sure that no matter how people are accessing the web, they have the same ability to view the content. We had this evolution of browsers that we've been talking about. In 1990 to 94, it was all very simple, text-based. In 93, we talked about how the images entered the scene and pretty much exploded the internet. Cross-browser compatibility made many of the web pages just fall apart and led to incredibly ugly code. In the beginning of 2000, browsers went back to this idea of separating content from style. And in 2005, it became standard practice to use HTML files, which we'll be learning about in this course, to create the content, and CSS files to style it. So as the browsers evolved, so too did HTML. The way it tends to work in most computer science and technology fields is that it's the coders and the developers who push the standards. So as coders learned that there were more and more things they wanted the ability to do, it's the browser's job to keep up. So where are we now? HTML5 is a cooperation between the W3C and the Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group. And what they've done is they've established these 4 guidelines for how HTML5 should be approached as browsers go to support it. The first idea is that new features should be based on HTML, CSS, which is the styling language, the DOM, and JavaScript, nothing more. They want to reduce the need for external plugins. It's very frustrating when you're on a browser and you find that you can't watch the video that somebody posted. They also want to move so that markup, or the markup language, can replace scripting. If you find that more and more developers are writing code to make something happen, get rid of the code and just make a simple tag that can do it instead. And finally, HTML5 should be device independent. It shouldn't matter whether you're on your phone, your laptop, a PC, or even on a screen reader. You want everyone to have the same access to the information. So when you think back over this video, there are certain lessons I really hope stick with you. The first is the idea that HTML is not a programming language, but rather a way that browsers can translate documents into viewable web pages. HTML was intended to facilitate many different content types: images, pictures, links, lists, everything along that line. What we've found throughout the history of the internet is that when designers want to do something, they tend to write non-standard code to force browsers to do it. So this is why we're developing new standards in HTML5 to handle these new requirements that people desire and push browsers to adopt the new standards. Today, let's talk about the request-response cycle, or basically what happens when you type something into the address bar of your browser. One of the things I think is really funny, and I'm guilty of it as well, is that we all do things and we have no idea how they work. So if I were to ask you, when you type in an address, what happens? So this lecture is actually one of the most technical of this entire class. I don't want you to feel like you need to memorize this or write it down, but I do think it'll help you understand a little bit more what's going on as you learn HTML5. So one of the things you might want to understand is the client-server relationship. Servers are basically machines that hold all the resources, and our hope is that they're always connected to the network. Clients are what we're using. We're the machines that you use for personal use, like laptops, phones, etc. Let me show you in this picture. It's really common to use networks such as something called a LAN or a WAN. A LAN is a local area network. And so what I have right here is this idea that we can have 3 different computers and they're all sharing one server. Why would we want to do that? Well, a lot of times you only have one printer or one of the different resources. This way, all 3 machines can work together and share that one resource. So the LAN is the local area network. Sometimes you want to have something larger or a wide area network. So in movies where the good guy is breaking into the building to steal the software, what's typically happened is they have this server that everyone who works in the building can access, but no one outside the building. Or you can even have it across different buildings, but you don't want anyone from the outside to really be able to get your information. So a local area network is kind of like your office building. A wide area network might be a university where you want to be able to share servers across multiple buildings. The largest wide area network is, of course, the internet. So now we get back to that question of what happens when you type something into the URL. What you're doing is that you, the client, are requesting a web page, and the server needs to respond with the appropriate files. So when you type something in, this is called the URL. And every URL has 3 parts. The protocol, how you want to connect, the domain, which is the server, and then optionally, you can include the document. So even though you're typing in one URL, one of the things to realize is that usually you're actually requesting lots and lots of files all at once. So the protocols that most people have seen, the first one is HTTP, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. The second one, HTTPS, is the same idea, only now we're having a more secure protocol. So if you're ever connecting to a bank or any place where you're putting in passwords, make sure that the first thing you see in that URL is HTTPS. If you don't connect. The third one is called the File Transfer Protocol, and it's a little bit different. When you see HTTP, it's kind of expecting that you're going to give back and forth HTML5 code. With FTP, it could be any type of file. So we have the protocol. Now let's talk about what the domain names represent. Usually the domain names are something recognizable, such as umich.edu would be for University of Michigan, google.com, wikipedia.org. So each of these sites has a different top-level domain. How did you get them? How do some people get to be .edu and some .com, some .biz, etc.? Well, they're actually determined by ICANN. And their job is to go in and decide which types of organizations qualify for different domains. I've included a link here if you want. You can go and see what the different types are. But the important thing to know is that your domain name is actually mapped to an address. And in the old days, like when my dad was on the internet, if he wanted to connect to someplace, he would actually type in numbers, 185.261, etc., etc. Well, there's been a new version of IP addresses because every single client needs their own address. And if you think of how many people have laptops and smartphones, we need a lot of different options. So with these IP addresses, you basically have sets of numbers, you have these different sets right here where each X can represent one of 16 different values. So you can see we have a lot of options, over 300 trillion, in fact. As I said, luckily for you, the domain name server lets you type in something really simple like umich or Google, and it's the one that turns it into that really long number. The last part of your URL is the document. So sometimes you want to specify a very specific document that you want to get. So for instance, the contact page, or in this case, another one, I have the file that's inside a folder. But sometimes you don't put a document at all. In fact, most of the time you don't. If you type in wikipedia.org or facebook.com, there's no file name. But that's okay. Every server has a default every server has a default document that it's going to return. Usually it's called index.html. All right, so we figured it out. We know what it means when we're typing something in. We understand the request. What happens though once we type that in is we are actually going to get back a lot of information. Headers, cookies, form data, all the stuff that you don't see. So the important thing to know is that the server returns files, not web pages. For a lot of us, we're very visual. So when we type in a URL, we're looking and we're like, oh, here's my page. But sometimes the browser might be returning something for different types of screen readers, assistive technology. So it's not returning a web page, it's returning lots and lots of files. Hopefully. I will admit that sometimes the server can't fulfill the request. And if it can't, it'll send back an error code. I think a lot of you are familiar with 404, where it says file not found. That usually means you typed something in wrong. If you get a 500 error, that actually means that the server's down. So you may as well go have a snack, do something fun, come back later and type it in again. So I want to kind of do a live demo with you of what happens when we type something in. So I've written it down for you. It looks up the domain, the DNS returns an IP address, and then a whole bunch of files start to be returned. Let's take a look. What I've done here is I've gone to the School of Information site at the University of Michigan. I simply typed in si.umich.edu. I didn't type in the protocol because it usually just defaults. So what you see here visually is a page, student looking out, looking very inspired, etc. But now I'm going to do a little trick here where I right-click on the screen and I'm going to choose the option that says Inspect. And a little button, a window is going to pop up to the side here. And I'm going to say, you know what? I would like to see all the information that's being returned when I actually request this page. I'm requesting one page. I'm going to hit refresh. And if you look off to the side, don't worry that you can't see the details. But you should see that this single page is actually made up of lots and lots of files. And each one of these files was a separate request. Okay, so let's review. This was a kind of long video where really all I want you to come away from it with is the knowledge that every URL has those three parts: the protocol, the domain, and the document. And realize that what you're creating is bigger than just one file at a time. Every request-response cycle is usually lots and lots of rounds of communication between the client and the server. So we're going to start off small. We're going to do one file at a time. But you can always look ahead to building bigger and bigger web applications. One of the things you might notice is that there are a lot of different options for how you can view web pages. And these different options are called your different browsers. So different browsers have their pros and cons. I am not one of those people who gets really passionate about using one over the other. But I will tell you, as you become a web developer, if you decide to, you're going to want to know some of these differences. It's perfectly natural to have a preferred browser. For most people, it's whichever one was installed on their computer. But when you want to create websites, you might have one browser you use to look at things, but you really want to test your site on multiple browsers. So let's talk about some of the differences. First, we have Internet Explorer. And for a long time, it was the most popular browser, and that was just because it was the one that came with Microsoft Windows. It was platform dependent, and what that means is that it doesn't automatically work if you have a Mac. In 2015, Windows 10 came out, and instead of including Internet Explorer as the default, it's using something called Microsoft Edge. Edge is meant to replace Internet Explorer, so people who buy new computers are going to be using Edge. But don't forget, people don't buy new computers all the time, or even if they do buy a new computer, they might decide they still like Internet Explorer better. So you basically want to make sure that you're considering both browsers. Another option is Google Chrome. Google Chrome was developed by, surprise, Google, and it was a freeware that they created to be used on Microsoft Windows. However, it's later been ported, or you can consider it changed, so that it works on Linux, your Apple machines, your Android, basically most machines that you're going to come across. The nice thing about Google Chrome is that they really focused on security. So if that's something that you're kind of concerned about, Chrome is a good way to go. The next option is Firefox. Once again, the theme seems to be I'm always recommending free and open source browsers. What open source means is that they've actually shared their code with everyone for how they created Firefox. And this is a really great way to let people make suggestions and improvements to it. It's also available for Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and different BSD operating systems. So who's using the different browsers? Back in 2014, I can show you that Internet Explorer had a really big chunk of the market, right around there. You had Internet Explorer 11, Internet Explorer 10, Internet Explorer 9, etc. So they had the biggest chunk, and then Chrome was getting a lot bigger, as well as Firefox. Well, when we look over here at 2017, though, we can see that Chrome really made a big surge, and up to 64% of desktops and laptops were using Google Chrome, followed by Firefox, Internet Explorer, etc. This is always going to change. It's going to flux. You can't pick one browser and say, hey, this is the new one that everyone's going to be using. And the other interesting thing to kind of think about is, especially in this old map over here, people use really old browsers because people like to use what they're used to. One thing that I'm hoping all the students in my class take into consideration, though, is accessibility. Accessibility is basically the ability of a browser to support all these special functionalities and all these new HTML5 tags and all types of assistive technology. So one place you can go is this site, www.html5accessibility.com. And what you'll find at this site is how well the different browsers are supporting the tags. So you can see right now, Edge actually has 100% compliance, which isn't surprising because it's one of the newest browsers, so they had accessibility in mind right from the beginning. The other browsers were created before people were paying quite as much attention, so they're definitely making strides to get better and better. However, it is important to notice that Internet Explorer is at 56%, and since it's been basically relegated into the background, it's unlikely that it's going to get much better. So what I want you to take away from this is that browsers can really vary in how well they adhere to different standards. And different versions of browsers also need to be considered as well. Just because something didn't work in 2018 doesn't mean it won't work in 2019. So the best thing that you can do is write your code and then open it up in Safari and Firefox and Chrome, as many different browsers as you can. Not only will it make your site better, but it'll be a little bit interesting for you as you can look at the different ways that HTML5 is supported. So one of the things that you're going to learn about making your web pages is that once in a while you have to bite the bullet and stop listening to me and start creating things on your own. Till now, we've talked about browsers and how you can look at web pages, but when it comes time to create a web page, we have to use a different type of software called an editor. Before we begin typing in your code, though, it is always worth your time to organize yourself and organize your files. So step one, you need to decide where on your computer you're going to save your HTML files. I highly recommend that you make your own folder called HTML, maybe HTML week 1, week 2, but something so that you can find your code. Second, you need to come up with a naming convention. This is a fancy way of saying, name your file something that you're going to remember. Usually in class, I end up with like 18 different files that all say page 1, page 2, page 3, and that's not really helpful for me figuring out what's inside the page. So when you come up with your names, it's usually a good idea to have kind of 2-word names, such as, intro page, favorite restaurants, summer pictures. When you use two names, though, you can't leave spaces between the names, so you'll often add a dash between it or use something called camel case, where you use lowercase for the first word and uppercase for the second name to have that little hump as if you're a camel. But again, it's very important that you do not use spaces and that you are very consistent with your capitalization. Computers don't like it when you aren't consistent. The next thing you need to do is decide on an editor. If you're using Windows, you might be tempted to use Notepad because it's a built-in editor that you can find easily. But it isn't really conducive to creating web pages. So instead, I would highly recommend Notepad++, Sublime, or VS Code, also called Visual Studio Code. In the same way, on a Mac, you can always find a software editor called TextEdit, but it doesn't really have all the cool tips and tricks that you can use to make a web page. So instead, I would recommend TextWrangler, Sublime, or again, VS Code. All of these editors are free, all right? But some of them, you might have to take that extra step to download and put on your computer. If you're a paid learner on the Coursera platform, you do have access to VS Code right here within the site. But if you're one of our kind of non-paid learners, don't worry, you can still do everything we do. You just have to download it first. Once you've decided on your editor, you're going to open it up. And then oddly, before you do anything else, I'm going to want you to save your file. All right, and when you go to save it, don't forget to put it in a nicely named folder so you can find it later. The next step is to add 3 parts to a page. The doc type, which says, hey, I'm going to use HTML5. The head section of your page, which is usually where you put your title so people can see it on the top. And then any kind of tags or content you want in the body. Save often. Every time you type in a few lines, hit that Control-S or Command-S. It's a shortcut for saving your file. Then when you're all done, you have your code in your editor, but you want to open up your page in your browser so you can see all the cool stuff that you've made. So let's try this together using Visual Studio Code. The first thing that I'm going to do is make a folder called WD4E. I'm going to right-click and click on New Folder, or you can also go to File, New Folder. And I'm going to name it, as I mentioned, just something I'll remember, WD4E, and maybe add an HTML because, we're going to do a lot of coding together. All right? So now I have my folder where I want to keep my files. I've opened up Visual Studio Code, and don't be scared off by all these different options. Focus in on the one option that says New File. And go ahead and just go, we want to use a regular old text file. All right. I'm going to close this window over here. And remember, I said one of the first things we want to do is we want to save this file. So for the very first time, I welcome you to go to File and then Save As. I'm going to call this my first page.html. And if you notice, it is in my WD4E folder. That's very important, right? We want to make sure it's in there. And I'm going to hit Save. All right. Our next step is very tricky and kind of exciting and makes you feel like a real coder, even though we haven't done any coding before. Because I told Visual Studio Code that this is an HTML file, do you see up there? I am able to do exclamation point, tab, and it fills in all this crazy HTML stuff that we might not know how to use. The important part to notice is that I've included doc type HTML. There's a title in here. I think I'll change this title to my first page. And there's a body tag where I'm just going to say, hi from Colleen. All right. If I look up here near the top, I can see there's a little circle next to my file name. If you see a circle, that means I haven't saved it recently. So I am going to do a Command-S to save it. And now I've made my first page. Yay! But I need that last step. That last step is, how do you go from looking at something as an editor to actually seeing it in your browser? And that's where it's so important to make sure that you remember where you saved your file. I'm going to open up my folder, make this a little bigger for you. I'm going to click on my first page.html. And as you can see, I get the oh so exciting page that says, "Hi from Colleen." One of the reasons a lot of people give up on coding early on is that there's actually a lot of ways and places that things can go wrong. All right, so let's always talk about that. Let's jump on the message board. Let's learn how to go on and search for things. But I would really like to try to prepare you and know there are some things that you're going to do and everyone does it, so it's okay. The first thing that happens to many people is that when they click on their file, instead of opening up in Chrome or Safari or Firefox, it opens back up in Sublime or TextEdit. It opens up in the editor. If that happens to you, you're going to want to right-click on your file and select Open With, and then you can pick up a browser. Sometimes when you open your page, instead of seeing, the content that you were hoping, you actually see all that ugly HTML code and you can't figure out why it's showing you that text rather than the pretty page. If that's the case, usually the problem is that your file extension, you forgot to save it as .html. So you're going to want to go back and check that. Another problem that can happen is you can change your code, but even after you've changed it so that instead of saying "Hi from Colleen," maybe you want to say like "Hi from Catherine," "Hi from Sochi," you change it and nothing happens. Well, just because you change your HTML file in your editor and you've saved it, you still need to go in and tell your browser, "Hey, I have a new version." And that's called refreshing your browser. So you can either go back up to the top and hit the refresh button, or you can try to use something called a shortcut, which is to just type in Command or Control R. Also, don't forget to verify your file name. Sometimes we think we're opening one file, but we're actually opening a different one. Another problem that people often get is they get what we call like weird characters, things that don't look like English. That happens most often when people copy and paste code from a PowerPoint or Google slide instead of typing it in by hand, and they kind of pick up these kind of hidden characters. So try those things if it's not working for you. Try refreshing the page, try going back and making sure you saved your file. And if you copied and pasted, try to go back in and type it in by hand. Throughout the rest of this course, you will see examples that I have written in various editors. TextEdit, Sublime, and VS Code may be a few. Today, I am introducing GitHub Codespaces. TextEdit, as I mentioned, is built in. Some people like to use it, but it tends to create problems that first-time coders really don't need to deal with. Sublime is a free, downloadable editor that provides helpful tools and features very similar to VS Code. GitHub Codespaces, however, is the option I strongly encourage all of you to use. Codespaces not only lets you write and run your code directly in your browser, it also provides an easy way to collaborate and share your work across devices and with others. Wherever you feel most comfortable, pick one, maybe two editors, and that's what you're going to want to focus on and really become a pro. Let's talk about how to use Visual Studio Code. Once you open up Visual Studio Code, it's not unusual to be overwhelmed at first as to what you should be doing, particularly since when we think of web pages, we like to think of a web page as being one page. But actually, a web page is numerous files that are all put together. So my recommendation for you is once you start Visual Studio Code, to always click on File, Open Folder, and navigate to the folder that you created for your site. In this case, it's WD4E HTML. The reason that you want to open an entire folder, and I'm going to say yes, I trust the authors because it's me, is because off here to the left, there is something called the Explorer that will list all the different files you have. which right now isn't that many. But when you create sites that include images or CSS, or even a site that has 3 or 4 pages, having this outline is going to let you link them together. So let's start off by making a simple file. I'm going to do new text file. And I won't do anything fancy this time. I'm just going to do a Command S, and I'm going to call this firstpage.html. I'm going to add some of the code that we talked about when we make a page, which is doc type. And I'm going to stop for just a second and point out that Visual Studio Code has already figured out what I'm trying to type in, and they even realize that I have a typo and that I forgot that first initial exclamation point. So I'm going to hit Tab, and it finishes the doc type for me. I'm going to add my HTML tag, and as I finished, it added the closing tag. I'm going to add my head. I'm going to add a title. Let's call it my amazing first page. You know what? Did you notice I'm running out of space? Let's resize this a little bit so we can have as much room as we want. My first page. And then I'm going to add a body tag where I will, again, just say, my first page looks great. On an earlier video, I mentioned the importance of saving your work as you go along, which I'm going to do right now. Again, you can either use File, Save, or you can do the shortcut. But once you look at your code, it's really important to make sure that you're always taking a moment to see what it looks like as well. One option for doing that is to go to your folder, find your first page, and when we click on it, it opens up in Google Chrome. I'm going to zoom in so you can see it a little bit better. And you can see I have a title up here of my amazing first page. Let's say I want to go back and say, maybe my first page looks maybe not great, it just looks okay. Because we're new, we have ways to improve. I'm going to save it, but when I go back over here, it still looks the same as it did last time. So if you remember, changing something in the editor doesn't automatically tell your browser to reload it. So I'm going to click here on the reload, and now it says, my first page looks okay. Personally, when I code, I like to have half my screen as the browser and half my screen as the text editor, so I can go back and forth and see both. I'm also going to, I'm going to go in here and add one more. I am adding another line. I'm going to do save, and I'm going to do reload. One of the things you might notice is how things look in the editor is not always how it's going to look on the web page. We'll learn how to fix that. But I want to show you one more tip just in case you feel like Visual Studio Code is the editor you want to use. I'm going to click back on Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go to the left-hand side, make it a little bit smaller, and go down to where I can find something called extensions. If you go to extensions, you will find something called Live Server. See that right there? Live Server by Rick Day. Install. You can feel pretty good when you see something has 33.9 million downloads. And I'm going to install it. I only have to do this once. That's it. I never have to do this again. As it installs, let me explain what Live Server does. Live Server will let you see the changes you make as you type. So I'm going to close this up here. I'm going to make sure that I can see both things on the same page. And now that I have Live Server, I'm going to go down here to the bottom of my screen where it says Go Live at the very bottom. Now, every time I make a change, let's go back and say, my page looks, we'll go back to amazing. Watch carefully, I'm about to hit save. And as I hit save, it automatically showed on the other page. I could change my, I'm going to, just to give you a sense, because Visual Studio Code's pretty cool, I'm going to type in just a little bit of Latin. And when I do, it fills it all in for me. Right? So when you use Visual Studio Code, the most important thing is to open it up and use proper naming conventions. If you would like, you can install Live Server, and then from there, we will go and learn how to add multiple files, multiple images, and lots of things that is going to make your web page look amazing. Hi everyone! In an earlier video, we walked through how to create an HTML file using Visual Studio Code. For many of you, that was your first experience opening an editor, creating a file, and seeing how HTML tags begin to take shape on the page. And if that felt a little overwhelming at first, that is completely normal. VS Code gives you a lot of power, but with that comes a lot of buttons, panels, and options. Today, we're going to build on what you learned there, but instead of working on your computer, we're going to explore a web-based editor called GitHub Codespaces. Nothing complicated yet. This video is just about helping you understand what Codespaces is and why you might want to use it. We'll write actual code in the future. Before we jump into Codespaces, let's take a step back and talk about IDEs, because you'll hear this term a lot as you continue learning HTML. IDEs are Integrated Development Environments, a fancy phrase that simply means software that helps you write, organize, run, and preview your code. In our VS Code video, you saw an IDE in action. It helped you create new files, keep your project organized, highlight your HTML tags, and save and preview your work. Now, IDEs come in two main types. Some IDEs live on your computer, like Visual Studio Code or Sublime Text. These tools are great when you're working offline, meaning you don't have internet connection, or when you want something fully installed on your machine. Other IDEs live online, inside your browser, like GitHub Codespaces or CodePen. These let you code without installing anything on your computer. You'll see CodePen throughout the textbook examples. And Codespaces will be our main tool when we want to store and share our work on GitHub. The wonderful thing is that the HTML, what you're writing, works the same in every single IDE. GitHub Codespaces works like VS Code, but runs fully in your browser. No installation is needed. It's going to give you a built-in code editor that looks extremely similar to VS Code, and your files are stored directly on your GitHub repository. So it doesn't matter how big your images are, they'll live there. They also provide a way to run, preview, and most importantly, share your web pages. One of the biggest benefits of Codespaces is that it works very much like VS Code. The layout looks familiar, the file tree, kind of like where the different files go, appears on the left, and the editing window feels the same. But again, everything runs in your browser, so you can code from anywhere. No downloading, no installations, no worrying about which computer you're using. Because Codespaces is part of GitHub, your files are saved directly in your GitHub repository. That means your work is backed up online. You're not going to lose it. You can open from any computer, and it becomes very easy to share your website as you're building it. You can also run and preview your page right inside Codespaces, just like you did with Live Preview in VS Code. In a future video, we'll open a Codespace together and build your first HTML template in this environment. For now, just remember, Codespaces gives you the same power as VS Code, but entirely in the cloud. Whether you're using VS Code, Codespaces, or even CodePen, you'll always follow a similar workflow. In any IDE, you'll first create your new file, like your index.html file. Second, you'll edit it, adding your headings, your paragraphs, and other tags. Third, hopefully actually from the beginning, you'll be able to organize your project, keeping all of your images or style sheets in the right places. Also in the IDE, you'll be able to save your work frequently. The most important part, of course, is always being able to preview your web page in a browser. Code is ugly. It doesn't look great, but looking at the code live, that's where the fun is. These steps never really change. The buttons and menus may look slightly different, but the process is the same across editors. So the skills you learn in VS Code carry directly into using code spaces. Finally, let's talk about why I'm showing you more than one editor in this course. We started with Visual Studio Code because that's the traditional workflow many professional developers use. Today, I'm introducing Code Spaces, which is online, because it's integrated with GitHub and which makes it incredibly convenient for building and sharing websites. And you may have noticed that throughout the textbook, you've seen CodePen, which is great for quick little examples and practicing new HTML or CSS ideas. You do not have to become an expert in all of these, but learning the basics of several tools will make you a more flexible and confident coder. And again, your HTML is the same no matter which editor you choose. That's all for this introduction. In the next videos, we're going to open 2 different editors together and actually build out your basic HTML template. I'll see you in the next video. Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about GitHub. I know that for introductory programmers, it may be intimidating. Heck, sometimes even for experienced programmers, it can be overwhelming. But I promise you that it's really worth learning, and I also promise to keep it simple for you. We're going to look at what GitHub is, why we're using it in this class, and then we'll actually walk through how to create an account. Let's talk about what GitHub actually is. The easiest way to think about it is that GitHub is kind of like Google Drive, but specifically for website files and code. It's a place where you store your work online so that you can get to it from any computer. Lots of people use GitHub, students, designers, companies, but don't worry, we're just going to use it at a very simple level. You don't need any programming background to use the parts we'll be using. For this class, GitHub is basically going to be your online folder for your web pages. So why use GitHub in a beginner-friendly web design class? First, GitHub is free. That's always a plus. Second, it keeps your files backed up in the cloud. So even if your laptop crashes or you move to another computer, all your work is still safe. It also makes it super easy to share your work with your instructors or your peers. You'll just send a link instead of juggling files and sending them. And the coolest thing for this class is something called GitHub Pages. This is what lets you publish your web page to the internet with almost no startup. So really, GitHub is giving us storage, sharing, and publishing all in one place. All right, let's jump in and get started. One quick note though, GitHub sometimes changes how their sign-up page looks. So your screen might look a little different from mine, but the general steps, entering your email, picking a password, choosing a username, will be the same or very similar. Okay, with that in mind, let's get started. Here I am on the GitHub homepage, github.com. Up in the top right corner, you should see a button that says Sign Up. I'm going to click that now. The first thing it asks for is your email. Go ahead and type your email address here. I'll type a sample one. Next, it asks for a password. Again, I'll type one in. You won't see it on screen, but that's okay. Make sure it's a password that you'll be able to remember. Now we're at the username box, and this is really important. Your GitHub username will be seen by everyone, so choose something you're comfortable with. It doesn't have to be fancy, but I would avoid something too weird like I love pickles, or time sensitive like so-and-so forever, unless you're really sure about that relationship. In most cases, when you type in your username, You're going to get an error message that says it's not available and you need to have something a little bit more specific. You can add something yourself or take one of their examples. So new coder 72 is available. Next, you'll enter in your country or region. Personally, I would avoid hitting yes for receive occasional product updates and announcements. You really don't need to do that. Depending upon your setup, you may have a verification step here. If so, go ahead and fill that in. I'm going to go ahead and click on Create Account. GitHub may ask you to solve a quick puzzle here or verification step. Just follow the instructions. It only takes a moment. In this case, I need to go in to my email and find that code and click Continue. As a recap, in order to create a GitHub account, you just follow the steps of going to github.com and clicking on Sign Up, entering your email and choosing a password, selecting an appropriate username, completing any quick verification it might ask for, and again, you can skip any advanced setup. The free plan is all that you need. That's it. In the next videos, we'll walk through how to create a repository and how to upload your files so your website can go live.